To my shock, my usually quiet and shy son Alan was doing that with my intimate clothing. My face burned crimson as my body trembled uncontrollably. How did my boy turn out like this? Late that night, I got up to use the bathroom and noticed Alan's lights still on. Just a month left until his college entrance exams. Maybe he's burning the midnight oil to study, I thought, pride swelling in my chest. After all, I'd quit my job to support him full-time. Softly, I crept toward his room to remind him to rest. But then, a rough, rhythmic panting froze me mid-step. Peering through the door crack, I saw Alan lying sideways on his bed, clutching a crumpled dark cloth to his face. His glassy eyes were glued to his tablet where a graphic film played. God, he looked exactly like those lecherous characters from those Japanese videos. Heat rushed to my cheeks. As a grown woman, I knew exactly what he was doing. Still, it took me a few seconds to process. My baby was 18 now, an adult with urges. Then it hit me, the dark cloth was my freshly worn underwear. Shame burned through me, torn between anger and helplessness. Sure, this was wrong, but exposing his privacy now, during his exam crunch, would crush his spirit. I stood rooted, conflict twisting my gut. Just then, Alan weakly set aside the underwear with a satisfied sigh and flicked off the light, leaving me in suffocating darkness. My heart was pounding like crazy as I stumbled back to my room, dazed and confused. But even after lying in bed, I just couldn't fall asleep. I kept tossing and turning, completely overwhelmed by worries about Alan. He had always been such a good, sensible kid. So how did he suddenly pick up such a bad habit? I barely slept all night. The next morning, I walked to Alan's bedroom and pushed the door open, only to find he had already left for school. Right then, I made up my mind. I had to find a way to talk to him tonight, subtly but firmly. Young people these days don't understand moderation. If he keeps staying up late doing that, it'll take a toll on his health. And what if it messes up his exam results? I'd be devastated. But talking about this kind of private stuff with Alan was awkward. We're different genders after all. It's not an easy topic to bring up. The whole day I felt anxious and uneasy. After making dinner, I sat waiting, constantly glancing at the clock, hoping Alan would come home soon. Finally, evening came. My heart was racing again. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say so many times in my head, terrified I'd mess it up or make things worse. I just hoped Alan would listen. He had to stop. Not just for his studies but for his health too. But by 7 p.m. he still wasn't back. I was getting more and more restless. He's usually home by now. So where was he? Just as I was caught up in those thoughts, there was a knock at the door. I rushed over thinking it was Alan. But when I opened it, it wasn't him. It was his friend, Albert. Albert didn't look like your typical 18-year-old. He looked mature with broad shoulders and a tall, sturdy frame. He wore a white tank top and his well-defined chest muscles stood out clearly. A faint scent of sweat clung to Albert, mixed with something unmistakably masculine. It made my heart flutter for a second. What a strong-looking young man he'd grown into. I noticed his eyes lingered on the thin straps of my tank top, and when I heard him swallow hard, I snapped back to my senses. Embarrassed, I quickly adjusted my clothes and gave him a polite smile. "Albert, is something wrong?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He scratched his head, looking a bit sheepish. "Rebecca, I came to ask Alan about a math problem." That sounded perfectly reasonable and I didn't think too much of it. I invited him in without hesitation. He and Alan had always been close, often helping each other out with schoolwork. "Alan's not home yet," I said. "You can wait here. I'll go wash some fruit for you." As I walked to the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from behind, closely. Just as I came out with the fruit, Alan walked in. He was holding a black bag, didn't even say hi, and went straight to his room. I was about to scold him for being rude when Albert suddenly said, "Rebecca, Alan seemed off today." At that exact moment, his hand brushed lightly against my waist. I wasn't sure if it was intentional, but the warmth of the touch sent a small shiver through me. "Do you really think so?" I asked, looking up at him, my voice barely steady. He seemed to breathe a little heavier and I, annoyingly, felt my knees weaken a little. What is wrong with me? This was just a teenager. My son's classmate. Right then, Alan stepped out of his room, pulling me back to reality. His face was pale and he looked worn out. Still, he forced a smile and greeted Albert. The two of them chatted for quite a while, whispering about everything from schoolwork to games and anime. Before long, Albert brought up something. "Hey Alan, I heard there's this well-known art teacher at school who has a few guaranteed admission spots to top universities. If you get one of those, you basically don't have to worry about the college entrance exam at all." Alan's eyes lit up, but the excitement faded just as quickly. "But I'm not good at anything artsy. Stuff like that has nothing to do with me." I kept their conversation in mind. "I really want my son to succeed, to get into a top university. That way I could finally feel like I've lived up to the memory of my late husband. After going over 2 more questions with Alan, Albert said he had to go. I asked him to stay for dinner, but he politely refused no matter what I said. Such a shy young man. At the dinner table I took a good look at Alan. My heart ached. His dark circles were getting worse. He was starting to look like a panda. He must not be sleeping well. I hesitantly asked him what he thought about relationships between boys and girls. His face immediately darkened. He shoved a few bites into his mouth, then put down his chopsticks. Mom, I'm gonna take a shower. Soon I could hear the water running in the bathroom. Suddenly, something hit me. I had just tossed my fresh laundry into the dirty clothes basket. My heart skipped a beat. Oh no, what if Alan saw them? Lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alan was acting more and more off. Like last night. Where did he even get that tablet he was using to watch porn? And today he came home so late, sneaking in with a black bag like he was hiding something. What on earth was in there? I glanced toward the bathroom. He probably wouldn't be out anytime soon. Driven by curiosity, I quietly unlocked his bedroom door and started searching. After digging around for a bit, I finally found that black bag hidden under his bed. He hid it so carefully. Something was definitely up. I felt a little guilty, like I was doing something wrong, but I just couldn't stop myself. I opened the bag, and inside I found brand new personal items still in their packaging. There was even a strange little toy, something I'd never seen before. My face started to burn. Alan had gone out and secretly bought this after school? Didn't he already get enough on his own? If this keeps up, his frequency might keep increasing. And with just 1 month until the college entrance exam, can his body even handle it? Suddenly, I heard the bathroom door open. I quickly stuffed the toy back in, shoved the bag under the bed, and rushed out of the room. That's when I noticed Alan looked weird, like he was trying hard not to meet my eyes. I asked gently, Alan, what's wrong? He didn't say a word, just headed straight back to his room and locked the door behind him. My mind was spinning. I froze for a second, then something clicked. I rushed to the bathroom, and sure enough, the dirty laundry was gone. In that moment, I really wanted to storm into his room and give him a proper lecture. But then I thought about how distant he'd seemed at dinner, how defensive he got. I didn't want to crush his pride. What if I ended up scarring him for life? That night, I heard heavy breathing coming from Alan's room again. My chest tightened with unease. He was probably watching those Japanese films again, trying to release himself. If this kept going, it would definitely affect his grades. But yelling or hitting him wasn't the answer either. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I felt. Half asleep, a thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Albert had mentioned that art teacher at school. The one with a few guaranteed admission spots to top universities. Fallon could get one of those. That idea felt like a door opening to a brand new path. Alan had to go to college. Not just any college, a top one. I still had Albert's number. The next day, I gave him a call and asked to meet up during Alan's lunch break. We met at a nearby restaurant. Albert's eyes lingered on me, scanning my body with a heat I couldn't ignore. I couldn't help feeling a little smug. After all, I was almost 40 but clearly still had it. Even young guys couldn't resist. Still, I didn't forget why I came. In a soft voice, I asked, Albert, what you said yesterday, about the art teacher having those university spots. Was that true? His eyes filled with a strange kind of hunger, like he wasn't even trying to hide it. I even saw a bit of drool glistening at the corners of his mouth. Then he reached out with his thick hand and grabbed mine tightly. Rebecca, you're stunning. My whole body tensed. What the hell was this kid trying to pull? Before I could react, Albert suddenly stood up and wrapped his arms around me from behind. His chin rested on my shoulder, and I could feel his hot breath on my skin, heavy and shameless. I felt goosebumps rise all over. That young man's scent, it was full of energy and youth, drifted into my nose and somehow made my heart race a little. What are you doing? I asked, though my mind had already started going to strange places. Albert was tall, strong, and he was my son's classmate. Then he spoke in a soft, almost teasing voice. Rebecca, do you want the contact info for that art teacher? His words snapped me back to reality. A weird expression crept onto my face. Was this kid seriously trying to trade that info for getting close to me? He went on, Rebecca, you're so beautiful. Once I get into college, I'm definitely gonna chase after you. I've already sent the teacher's number to your phone. With that, he turned and walked off like it was no big deal. My heart was a mess. I'd just been hit on by my son's classmate, and he wasn't even shy about it. Albert was a smart kid. At least he knew not to let things like this distract him before the exam. He had some boundaries. But if he did come after me someday, should I say yes? The thought made my whole body heat up. Would Alan end up calling Albert Dad? It took me half an hour to calm myself down. Right now, the only thing that really mattered was whether my son could get into college. I dialed the art teacher's number and a deep, rich male voice came through on the other end. When he heard I was a student's mother, he paused for a few seconds. Then he said, "I know why you're calling. But if you want something, you have to give something. That's how the world works." I agreed right away, thinking he probably just wanted money. My late husband had left me with a decent amount of savings, hundreds of thousands. If it meant getting Alan a guaranteed spot at a top university, I'd spend every last cent without a second thought. He asked to meet that evening at a guest house on the outskirts of the city. He said he'd been staying there for a few days doing some sketching from nature. Wanting to make a good impression, I rushed home to get ready. I picked out a tight dress that hugged my curves and showed a tasteful but clear deep V neckline. My figure looked just right, elegant but not too over the top. I had no idea if the art teacher would go for this kind of look, but for Alan's future I had to give it my all. At exactly 6 p.m. I arrived at the location. It really was out in the middle of nowhere, almost 30 kilometers from the city. I knocked on the heavy iron gate, and less than half a minute later, a middle-aged man opened it. His looks were average, but there was something gentle about his smile that instantly put me at ease. "You must be Alan's mom. Come on in." As he spoke, he handed me a black blindfold with a little lock on it. "I'm currently working on a series of paintings about blind artists. Would you be willing to be my model?" Since the teacher himself was asking, I agreed without hesitation. He gently helped me put the blindfold on, then turned the lock with a soft click. "Come with me, Alan's mom," he said. Honestly, I was still a little nervous. The blindfold he gave me was clearly custom-made. Once it was on, everything went pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. It really did feel like being blind. I knew I wasn't exactly unattractive. And if the teacher had any weird intentions, how would I even stop him? Those messy thoughts kept swirling in my mind, and soon my face started to burn. My whole body felt strangely hot. But then I noticed his breathing, heavier now, and I could feel his warm breath brushing against the side of my neck. "Professor, are you feeling hot?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard the sound of him swallowing. "Rebecca, we're almost at the studio." I hesitated for a moment. Something about his voice sounded familiar. But when we first met, I was sure I didn't know him. He gently helped me sit down on a stool and placed a warm cup into my hand. "Here, drink some water. I know it's not easy modeling like this." I nodded faintly and took a sip, hoping it would help calm my nerves. But just seconds later, a strange itch started crawling up my skin, like tiny ants dancing under it. Something wasn't right with that water. The teacher opened my mouth and said, "Alan's mom, your skin is as tender as a young girl's, yet you have the temperament of a mature woman. It's really superb." I didn't know what my teacher meant by that. I felt my head getting fainter and fainter, so I just kept twisting my body. His breathing became more and more rapid. "Alan's mom, do you want Alan to get a guaranteed place? If so, then you..." Reason told me I should refuse, but I was losing my mind now. What exactly would the teacher do to me? I already had a guess in my mind. All these years I haven't been looking for a man. It seems that I have to cheapen the teacher. If he can give the guaranteed place to Alan, then it will be worth my effort. I had convinced myself that I wasn't as resistant as I was at first. The teacher also seemed to notice the change in my mood and pressed me down with one hand. But I felt a familiar scent on my teacher, the smell of youth. But when we met, he was clearly middle-aged. I didn't think deeply about it. Nothing else mattered in this moment. Afterwards, I blushed and asked, "Teacher, when will you give the reserved spot to Alan?" He gently hugged me, his arms wrapped around my hair. "Alan's mom, if you can always satisfy me, then that reserved spot will definitely be Alan's. This is a win-win situation for both of yous." My face turned even redder, almost as if I were going to burst into flames. The implication of what the teacher said was just too embarrassing. Honestly, even if it weren't for Alan, I would still want to be with the teacher. He's such a charming man. When we left the guest house, I felt dizzy, my body weak, and I could barely walk. But when I turned to look at the art teacher, his face remained calm as if nothing had happened. I couldn't help but admire him. Who would have thought that such a frail body held so much strength? By the time I got home, it was already 9 p.m. I saw my son slouched on the couch, his eyes glued to the tablet, looking tired but extremely excited. When he saw me walk in, he hurriedly turned off the screen. If I'm not mistaken, my son was probably watching some short videos. But honestly, I didn't want to bring it up too much to avoid triggering his rebellious side. I remembered that the results of the school's mock exam should be out by now, so I asked, "Son, how did you do on the mock exam?" His face immediately darkened. "I messed up this time, didn't do well." I wasn't surprised by his answer. He stays up late every night thinking about all those things between men and women. It's a miracle if he did well. I was so embarrassed that I wanted to find a crack to drill in. the old lady thinking of spring actually caught by the sun. I casually perfunctory 2 sentences. I did not expect my son did not believe it at all. His eyes showed an inscrutable gaze, seems to have seen through me. Mom, are you going to help me find a father? My body trembled, usually mute my son, now how the vision is so poisonous, but of course I will not admit it, laughing and scolding, you kid blindly say something. Alan didn't say much, just seriously policed me and shook his head. At this moment I felt that Alan was both familiar and strange. I was full of anticipation to change into a camisole and ultra-short skirt. Has not worn this kind of youthful and beautiful clothing for many years, but in order to give the art teacher a good impression and turned it out. Looking at myself in the mirror, my body is full of charm and dimpled, and my skin is as white as a freshly peeled egg. The baptism of the years did not leave traces on my face, but instead made me more and more mature and charming. Teacher, see if I don't charm you to death today. I followed the agreed time and came to the famous house again. The art teacher actually stood outside the door waiting early. Today I also let go from the bottom of my heart to convince myself. Everything is for the son can go to heavy school, pay more is worth it. My body slightly leaned forward, leaning toward the teacher. Teacher. I'm coming. Between words, I squeezed the teacher's hand. I didn't expect this action of mine to actually shame the teacher into a big red face. He stuttered, Alan's mom, you quickly put on the blindfold. I laughed out loud, the teacher yesterday, how crazy he is, not unaware of what to pretend to be innocent. I hugged him tightly and shouted, Teacher, then let's go. He shuddered and put a blindfold on me, then helped me inside. But this time he was in his original form, his big hands were not honest at all, always groping back and forth like a veteran of the flower industry. My heart was filled with absurd emotions. Art teacher's nature is different from the average man. Only when the woman can't see it will be revealed. But this is not important, the teacher likes this tone, satisfied. In making out, I once again smelled the youthfulness of the teacher's body, although all the actions are light, but that young and hairy temperament cannot be hidden. I actually had the illusion that this teacher now was not the one who had greeted me earlier, not really sure because of the blindfold. But I was startled by the thought myself. But it soon sank again and my mind went blank. When I left, I was flushed and stared at the art teacher, who looked as normal as ever for a long time, and finally found the clues. The person I made out with had a lot of sweaty hair on his body that was very dense and a little prickly, while the art teacher had a rustle of sweaty hair and was not the same person at all. I was struck by lightning, as if frozen in place I was set up. But soon I came back to my senses. Now is not the time to think about this. I have to go back to investigate a good, check the authenticity. After leaving the B&B, I dialed my son's homeroom teacher's phone and asked him about the art teacher's guaranteed admission to top universities. And the other party flatly stated that there was no such policy. I have mixed feelings and multiple guesses. I found my son doing homework in his room, the tablet still left on the couch. I stared at the door of my son's closed room and hurriedly took out the tablet and flipped through it, which not only stored a lot of small adult videos, but also some of Albert's selfies, and the dates of the photos were all a few months ago. In other words, this tablet is Albert lent to his son. The more I think about it, the more I feel terrible all this. I contacted Albert again. As soon as we met, he smiled warmly at me. The hormonal scent of youth came from his body, and all parts of him were covered with thick sweaty hair, not unlike the art teacher in my mind. What can I do for you, Auntie Rebecca? He surveyed me with an even more unbridled gaze than before, as if I was already in the bag. My mind was even more certain of my suspicions. This young man's guts were just too big. I trembled and asked, Albert, tell Auntie honestly, is it true that an art teacher can be guaranteed admission to a top university? He couldn't stop grinning after hearing that, and before I could react he just started getting handsy, right in front of everyone. That familiar warmth. It felt exactly the same as I remembered. Rebecca, you figured it out this fast? I thought it'd take you at least a couple of weeks, he said with a smug look. I was both embarrassed and annoyed. It was this little brat after all. I immediately pushed him away and snapped, Alan, this is a crime. If I call the cops, you could end up in jail. But he just shrugged, totally unfazed. Rebecca, I'm not scared of jail. But if Albert finds out about this. As he spoke, he pulled out a short video, and to my horror it was of me and him. I almost passed out. That little devil not only set me up and forced himself on me, he even recorded it, for his own sick pleasure. Rebecca, the real reason you're so desperate to get Albert into a top university is probably because he's been using your underwear for those things, right? The moment I heard that, everything clicked. This was all Alan's doing. He deliberately led Albert astray, lent him a tablet, encouraged him to steal my clothes. And then, when he showed up at my place, he just happened to mention that the art teacher held recommendation slots to elite colleges. Just enough bait to reel me in. From start to finish, I'd been completely played by this little brat. Then he stuck out his tongue, that disgusting red tongue, and licked his lips. "Rebecca," he said slowly, "you wouldn't want Albert to find out about us, would you?" I gave a weak nod. This little punk had gone through all that trouble just to get his hands on me. "Fine, it's only a month. I'll endure it. Pretend it's just a nightmare I have to get through." Alan grinned like he just won the jackpot and dragged me off to a hotel. I felt utterly humiliated. I'd actually fallen into this kid's trap. The worst part, there was no way out. I was stuck in a game I couldn't win. So for now, I had no choice but to play along. I stumbled home in a daze, broke down on the couch and cried my eyes out. My head was pounding and my eyes were so swollen I could barely open them. There was never any real shot at getting Albert into a top university through some special recommendation. In the end, it all depends on him. So I made up my mind, I needed to sit down and have an honest talk with him. I just wanted him to stay focused, to keep his grades steady. I didn't want some twisted mess between a man and a woman to ruin his future. And even if he ends up hating me forever, so be it. I slumped back into the couch, just waiting for my son to come home. Just thinking about Alan's young, strong body made my cheeks burn with heat. What's wrong with me? Why does part of me feel like this isn't so bad? The thought scared the hell out of me. Not long after, my phone rang. I hit the answer button. Turns out it was my best friend and she sounded panicked. "There's a huge problem," she said. Then she sent me a video, and my heart stopped. It was that video, me and Alan getting intimate. No blur. Nothing. I felt a mix of rage and shame. What the hell was Alan thinking? Is he out of his mind? He actually posted that online. My best friend told me it was spreading like wildfire. It was already in pretty much every group chat I was in. I stared into nothing, my eyes completely blank. That was it. I was done. Totally broken. If Alan ever saw that video, I can't even imagine what would happen. Just like my best friend said, traces of that clip are everywhere. In countless group chats. And online, people are saying the nastiest things. Some who knew me recognized both me and Albert in the video. They're calling me all kinds of names, saying I seduced my son's friend, calling me a cougar. Then right at that moment, my phone rang. It was Albert. "Rebecca, you have to believe me," he said. "I didn't upload that video. I swear." I was fuming. If Albert had been standing in front of me, I would have slapped him, twice. "Are you stupid or what? How could you let a video like that end up online?" He kept saying it wasn't him. But if not him, then who? Honestly, I didn't believe a word he said. I hung up on him right away and started thinking, how the hell am I supposed to fix this mess? Alan came home and the moment he saw me, he just exploded. "You disgusting woman," he shouted. My heart sank completely. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Did he already find out? I felt so wronged. If it weren't for him, I would have never fallen into Albert's trap. But Alan had lost it. His eyes were bloodshot like he was going crazy. He started smashing whatever he could get his hands on. "Do you have any self-respect at all?" he yelled. "I get it, you're lonely, you want a man. But why go after my friend? What are my classmates gonna think? What about my teachers?" I choked on my words, couldn't even speak. With how shy and quiet Alan usually is, I knew there was no way he could handle the stares and gossip. And with just a month left before the college entrance exam, it felt like everything was falling apart. Then he started banging his head against the wall. Bang, bang. Every hit felt like it landed on my heart instead. "Alan, please listen to me," I cried, holding him tight from behind. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I wrapped my arms around him and told him everything, how it all started step by step. He just stared blankly at the wall, not saying a word. I had no idea what was going through his mind. After a long silence, he finally spoke in a raspy voice. "So, you knew all about the stuff I did at night?" I nodded shyly. At this point, there was no point hiding anymore. I blamed everything on Albert, said he was the one who led Alan astray. He was the one who dragged him into those shady movies, who messed with personal things, who even made up some fake art teacher character just to humiliate me. Alan's face turned dark. "I want Albert in jail. I can't believe he did this to you." Yes, we'll do whatever you want," I said softly, running my hand over his hair the way I used to when he was little. "But please, sweetheart, don't be mad at Mom, okay? Don't let this mess ruin your exams." I choked on my words, couldn't even speak. With how shy and quiet Alan usually is, I knew there was no way he could handle the stares and gossip. And with just a month left before the college entrance exam, it felt like everything was falling apart. Then he started banging his head against the wall. Bang, bang. Every hit felt like it landed on my heart instead. "Alan, please listen to me," I cried, holding him tight from behind. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I wrapped my arms around him and told him everything, How it all started step by step. He just stared blankly at the wall, not saying a word. I had no idea what was going through his mind. After a long silence, he finally spoke in a raspy voice. So, you knew all about the stuff I did at night? I nodded shyly. At this point there was no point hiding anymore. I blamed everything on Albert, said he was the one who led Alan astray. He was the one who dragged him into those shady movies, who messed with personal things, who even made up some fake art teacher character just to humiliate me. Alan's face turned dark. I want you to love only me forever. Yes, yes, we'll do whatever you want, I said softly, running my hand over his hair the way I used to when he was little. But please, sweetheart, don't be mad at Mom, okay? Don't let this mess ruin your exams. Suddenly, Alan turned around and hugged me tight, so tight it actually startled me. The easel behind us crashed to the floor, and all the sketch papers scattered like startled doves. Before I could even say a word, his burning lips crashed onto mine. Clumsy but so full of heat, he pushed past my resistance. I've been practicing. He panted as he tugged at his school uniform, popping open the buttons to reveal his flushed chest. Every night before I fall asleep, all I think about is you. Without even realizing it, my hand slid down to his slim waist. My fingertips brushed against the fresh tattoo on his lower back. It was my name in English, still red and a little swollen. That hit me like a jolt. My mind just snapped. The next second he grabbed my thigh and lifted me onto the paint table. Tubes of color went flying, bursting open and splattering wild streaks everywhere. I lay back on the palette, cool watercolor smearing across my pale back like messy brushstrokes. Alan held my waist tight, his grip firm, almost trembling. Page 36 in my sketchbook. He whispered close to my ear, voice low and breathless. I drew the pose Mom always wanted. The only sounds left in the room at the moment were the watery sounds of clashing flesh and my moans with a sobbing voice. Beads of blood oozed from the teeth marks left by biting his shoulder as I climaxed in his hand. The only thing left in the studio was the sound of our heavy breathing. Then suddenly, the sound of the door unlocking froze us in place. What are you two doing? Albert's voice hit me like a bucket of ice water. I panicked and shoved Alan away. My shirt was still half unbuttoned. Albert stood at the door, eyes flicking between me and Alan. Alan's lips were still wet, and his school uniform collar was all messed up from me tugging on it. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. The next second, Albert strode toward me and grabbed the back of my head, pulling me into a kiss. His lips tasted like mint and cigarettes. He forced my mouth open, not giving me a chance to react. My eyes widened in shock, and I saw his eyelashes trembling just slightly. Since we're playing games, he said, pulling away and wiping the blood from my lip with his thumb. Then he turned to a stunned Alan. Why not play together? My shirt was still wide open, chest rising and falling fast. Albert pulled both of us into his arms, his body heat burning right through the fabric. Last week when you stayed over at my place, he whispered, biting Alan's earlobe while keeping his eyes locked on me. He was in the next room, listening. Alan's face flushed red, but his hand boldly slid down into Albert's waistband. Your teaching was really thorough, he said, voice low. That's when it hit me. So that's why Albert told me to keep quiet that night. A hot rush shot straight to my core. I yanked off Albert's tie and pulled him closer. Guess it's time we finish that lesson. Albert's hand was already inside my waistband, his calloused fingertips pressing hard against the most sensitive spot. I threw my head back and hit the easel, knocking over the palette. Cold paint dripped down my neck and slid under my shirt. Alan immediately dropped to his knees and started licking it off. His tongue hot and eager like a puppy trying to please its owner. Don't just focus on that. Albert suddenly grabbed my chin and forced me to look at him. At some point he'd undone his belt. The metal buckle jabbed into my hip, sharp and cold. Behind his glasses, his eyes had gone completely dark. Open your mouth. I flinched just a little, but Albert instantly yanked my hair back. The sharp pain made me open my mouth without thinking, and the next second he filled me completely. My throat burned from the pressure and tears blurred my vision almost instantly. Alan let out a frustrated whimper, his fingers fumbling to yank open my shirt. Trying to copy Albert, he leaned in and bit my nipple, clumsy and unsure, making it sting and itch all at once. I trembled, caught between the two of them. Albert's deep, steady thrusts clashed with Alan's awkward touches, and the contrast sent jolts of pleasure racing up my spine like sparks. Ah! My head hit the easel again, and sketch papers fluttered down around us like snowflakes. Alan took the chance to kiss me, his tongue still clumsy but sweet, tasting like green apple candy. The zipper on his school pants scratched against my thigh, and I could feel him, hard and twitching, under the fabric. Alan whimpered like a helpless pup. He suddenly pulled up his uniform shirt and grabbed my hand, pressing it to his burning chest. His heart was racing like it was about to burst, and his nipples were hard in my palm, like tiny pebbles. Just as I started to rub, Albert thrust in from behind without warning. Albert's wedding ring kept catching on my hip bone, each thrust sending a sharp chill through me. Between our tangled bodies, everything was slick with sweat and pre-cum. The spilled linseed oil only made it worse. Everything was way too slippery to even make sense. Alan's paint-smeared fingers gently pried my mouth open. "Look at me," he said, voice low and shaky. "Only me." As Alan cried out in release, Albert sank his teeth into my shoulder, leaving a bite mark that bled. Our bodies collapsed together, sweat and other fluids mixing with spilled paint, pooling on the floor. In that little puddle, I could see the reflection of cherry blossoms starting to fall outside the window.